I've had lots of requests to tell you why I was MIA in 2023. And so I'm going to do that this morning, and I'm going to share with you where I'm going now that I'm no longer MIA. In February of 2023, I got a sore throat and a cough. I didn't think much about it, but by the 1st of March, it hadn't gone away, and I was starting to have a backache in my lower back. And so I called my doctor, and he had me come in for a chest x-ray and a back x-ray. The chest x-ray showed that I had pneumonia, and so I went on antibiotics, and they did a good job of taking care of that. The back x-ray didn't show anything. And so come a couple of weeks later, pneumonia's doing well. Back's not. It's getting worse. And by the 3rd week, I was pretty much bedridden. And by the 4th week, not only was I bedridden, but to even get up to go to the restroom, I was in screaming pain. At that point, they took me into the hospital on a gurney because I couldn't sit up, and did an MRI and a CT scan and found that I had 2 broken vertebrae in my back. Now, I hadn't fallen. I hadn't done anything like you would expect to result in broken vertebrae, but it was the result of all the coughing I had done with the pneumonia. Not only did I have 2 broken vertebrae, but I was unique because normal people have 12 thoracic vertebrae. I have 13, and I had broken the 12th and the 13th. So over the next several months, I was in and out of the hospital and extended care 7 times each. And during that time, they did a procedure where they put cement in the breaks in the vertebrae to stabilize them. With PT and everything else that gets involved with that kind of an adventure, after a few months, I felt like, okay, I'm going to get my life back. And, this is all behind me. Well, a couple of months later, I was having an MRI follow-up, and my doctor tried to call me, but he couldn't reach me because it was a Friday afternoon and I was in the MRI. That weekend, I went downhill really quickly and was just totally and completely out of it. I would have brief moments of lucidity, and then I'd be off in Never Never Land someplace. My daughter wanted to take me into ER, but I'd had such bad experiences in ER, I wasn't interested. By Monday morning, I knew in one of those rare moments of lucidity that I needed to go into ER. And so when she got me there, normally in today's world, they don't let anybody stay with you in ER unless you're a minor. And they took one look at what was going on with me and the fact that they couldn't communicate with me and insisted that she stay. I wound up being admitted to the hospital, and the reason that my doctor had tried to reach me was that I had had a UTI that I didn't know anything about, and it had turned septic. The first couple of days I was in the hospital, I was just basically totally out of it. And the doctors told my daughter that if she had waited 2 more days to get me into the hospital, I would have been dead. So dealing with sepsis is not fun. And even once your body has somewhat healed from it, there are lingering mental complications. And the best way I can describe it is that my mind felt like it was Swiss cheese. It was full of holes. And gradually, after another hospitalization, another time in extended care and being home, I thought, okay, we're finally past all of the garbage, and, you're going to get your life back. Little did I know that another adventure lay ahead. Several weeks later, I found that my breathing at night was really weird. And rather than breathing without thinking about it, I was feeling every breath. And so I called my doctor. He had me come in for an x-ray and some blood tests, and then an appointment to see him later that afternoon, which was a Friday. I got to my doctor's office Friday afternoon, and he basically said, "You're on your way to ER." And I said, "What?" I don't want to go to ER. And he explained to me that my lungs were filling with fluid, and that was something that could be fatal. And so off we go to ER. And it's another nightmare. A couple of days before I can actually get a hospital bed. And the Tuesday after that, which was towards the end of October, I didn't check the date before I got on the video, but I want to say it was October 22nd. The doctor told me that I had 2 days to live. My lungs were half full of fluid. They were giving me medication to try to release the fluid, but it would damage my kidneys that were already compromised. And as they had some success finally in reducing the fluid, then it was, well, maybe you've got a couple of weeks. And then it was, well, maybe a month or two. And then it went back to, well, maybe a week or two. In the meantime, my daughter didn't think that I would live to see Thanksgiving. The doctors were wrong. I saw Thanksgiving. I saw Christmas. I'm recording this on January 22nd. I am so grateful to be here and to be able to go back to doing something that I truly believe my life was spared so I could continue to do. And that's work with those who were abused as children to achieve emotional freedom in adulthood. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because it's my story. I grew up being sexually abused as a child at a time when nobody talked about it. It wasn't on the public radar. So as a kid, you think you're the only one, and that there must be something wrong with you that you're experiencing this. I grew up in New York City, and when I was 12, I clearly remember standing on a subway platform, listening for the clank of the approaching subway. There was a curve on the tracks coming into the station, and so the headlight on the lead engine of the subway would be reflected off the subway tiles before it was visible. I was watching for the light. I was listening for the clank of the wheels, and I was trying to make a decision. Was I going to jump? The pain was so great, I simply didn't want to live anymore. But even at that young age, I had spiritual convictions that kept me from jumping. Fast forward, I started looking for a way to escape. I begged an aunt and uncle to let me come live with them, but I couldn't tell them why. Because like so many of you, I was shoving everything in the closet and trying to pretend that it didn't exist. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know what somebody would think of me if I told them. All they could see is that if I didn't go home, my mother would be hurt. And so the next morning I was on a plane back to New York. My first plan to escape hadn't worked. I set about to create a second plan. I was ahead in school, and so my second plan was just to get farther ahead and graduate as soon as possible and then leave home. My socially acceptable way of running away was to do that and get myself on a college campus 2,500 miles from home, 1 month after my 16th birthday. That gave me physical safety, but all of the emotional crap went with me. And yes, it was jammed in a closet, but it was still there, and it was still impacting my life. A few years later, I received a life-altering epiphany. You are not responsible for your father's choices, but you are responsible for how you allow them to impact your life as an adult. Very powerful epiphany. It's true for every one of you that is watching this video, regardless of what unfairness, abuse, what anything you've been subjected to that was not fair, was not good. You're never responsible for somebody else's choices. You are always responsible for how you allow their choices to impact your life. There's still no programs around abuse at that time. So I jumped into the self-help arena looking for answers. And I found things that were helpful. The ones that were helpful, I kept and I put in my basket, and the ones that weren't, I tossed and looked for another piece. Over time, I had a lot of pieces in my basket, but none of them connected with each other. And so my challenge was to connect those pieces. It took time. It took years. Fast forward several years, and I've done a lot of healing, but I also know I'm nowhere near done. I've got a lot more to do. And on a Monday night, my phone rang. It was the leader of my local religious congregation, and he asked me to speak in church on Sunday. I said, no problem. I'd be happy to. I'm one of those crazy people who actually likes public speaking. And I'm thinking faith, hope, charity, no big deal. And then he throws me a curveball. Now, at this point, I'm divorced. I've got my own business. My oldest daughter is making horrible life choices, and I'm involved with the juvenile justice system. And I have 2 younger daughters that are still at home. And then Frank says, you have more stress in your life than most people do, and you seem to deal with it better than most people do. I want you to speak on how you deal with stress from a gospel perspective. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. And after I hung up talking with him, I went and pulled my 2 younger daughters aside, and I said, I just got off the phone with Frank, and he asked me to speak in church on Sunday. And they rolled their eyes and said, so what else is new? And I said, he asked me to speak about how I deal with stress from a gospel perspective. And I feel like I need to make reference to the abuse that I experienced growing up. they were aware of it. But it was certainly not something that anybody else was aware of. And I was looking at announcing before 200 people in our local congregation that they had known their entire lives that I had been sexually abused as a child when nobody talked about it. I asked them if they were okay with that. And much to their credit, they said, "Yeah, Mom, we're good with it." And so on Sunday, as I began my talk, I made reference to the normal stresses that we deal with in everyday life, and then said, we also deal with uncommon stresses, things like divorce, health challenges, financial challenges, delinquent kids, having been sexually abused as a child. I listed a half a dozen things and said, I've experienced all of these. And then went on to talk about my strategies for dealing with them. After my talk, I had 3 women come up to me. 2 of them individually laid their head on my shoulders and amidst their tears said, I thought I was the only one. The 3rd one put her head on my shoulders and just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. She was incapable of speaking. But I knew, and she knew that I knew. That was the day that I knew that even though my healing was not yet complete, I had an obligation to reach back and light the way forward for those who did not yet know it was possible. And so, amidst running my business and raising my kids, I did that whenever I had an opportunity to do so. Fast forward several years, and it was time for me to shut down my interior design business and begin working with people to change their lives, because that was truly my passion. But I knew before I could do that, I had to complete my healing. Part of that was writing the 7 pillars of a happy and successful life, which are personal, physical, emotional, spiritual, professional, financial, and relationships, and determining what success looked like to me in each of those areas, and then weaving it together to create my unique definition of success. Having done that, that was the foundation that I used as I began working with people to create their unique definitions of success. I had some wonderful programs. People made great progress. They loved what I was doing. But I was finding that frequently they would hit a stumbling block where they didn't seem to be able to go forward. And as we explored that more, I found that that stumbling block was voices from their past, from their childhood. It was the legacy of the chains of the abuse they experienced as a child. Voices that told them that they were inadequate, that they were incompetent, that they were stupid, that they would never amount to anything. And those voices would come back and it would stop them in their tracks. And so I began focusing more on the legacy of abuse, sharing my story. And some wonderful things happened, and people made great progress. But I still knew there was something missing. And so almost 2 years ago, I ripped apart everything that I had done. And with the Lord's help, I created a new program. It included several of the things that I had done previously and some things that were completely new and different. And as I've worked with people, we have worked to separate their stories from their abusers and their enablers' stories, and to silence the voices that are the legacy of what they experienced in childhood, and not just let it stay stuffed in a closet, but to unlock that closet and to release it, throw it in the dumpster, get rid of it, put it in a bonfire, whatever. One of the first people that went through that program was an amazing young woman who had experienced sexual, physical, emotional, mental abuse. She had spent 5 years in therapy, and nothing had changed. She came to me on a referral, and she didn't truly believe that what I was doing could do what 5 years of therapy hadn't done. But as we talked about it, she wanted to try. Her husband had questions. He didn't want to see her suffer through another disappointment. He didn't want to spend more money on something that wasn't going to work. But ultimately, she decided to go ahead. It's a 12-week program. In week 6, as we went on to our Zoom call, she has tears running down her face. And she said, "In 6 weeks, I am a different person. You have done what 5 years of therapy couldn't do." At that point, I had tears running down my face. At that point, I knew that what I had created did not just have the power to improve lives. It had the power to change and transform lives, which is what I wanted to do all the time. I can tell you so many stories of how it has impacted people's lives. And when I got sick, I kind of shut down my Facebook groups and said, I'll try to keep you updated with what's going on my personal page. Well, I will be posting this video and some others in each of those groups later today. I'm back. Yes, there are things that I can't do physically at this point. I'm sitting in a wheelchair and I can't speak on stage and I can't travel and I deal with multiple medical appointments every week. But I'm back. My life was spared for a reason. Maybe that reason is to make a difference in your life. Reach out to me. Let's talk. Just know that you are worth living in emotional freedom and breaking the chains to your history.